Hello. Talk about traditions, and one of our family traditions was from my dad was barbecuing and cooking out. I remember doing him cooking when I was a small kid. His dad showed him the fundamentals of cooking outside on a grill. His first grill was a handmade like 55-gallon drum. Um, Dad wanted me to take over and cook later, so he would, always bring me. Anytime he started to cook, I would help him prep the grill, the food, and whatnot. And it was very important to him because his dad showed him, and then his dad did him the same way. I think of course, I'm the last of the Wolf name as far as besides my sons, which I will show them the same thing. But at that time, I was the last of the name, and he wanted that tradition to carry on, and it was really important to him. And of course, he passed in 2000, before my son Jay was born. But so now Jay will get the Wolf, breakdown on how to properly barbecue everything that I know about.
So what tradition's been passed down for me is the making of apple butter. It started like within my church, but then my family took it on. My grandmother is from Sneeville, Tennessee, and growing up she was the youngest of 7, and they had like an apple cider mill that they would use to make like apple cider and do apple butter and stuff like that. But when my parents got married and moved to Churchill, Tennessee, my dad was a pastor of a church in Hawkins County, and they did apple butter where you would have like the fire underneath, the copper pot up top, and then the first night you would be peeling the apples using like apple peelers, or even just using like a knife and chopping up the apples to just be like a handful of apples, and you put them in coolers for the next day. And then the next day you start around 4 to 5:30 in the morning, where you dump the apples into the copper pots, you fill them up with water, and like I said earlier, like they started using firewood, which wound up being really smoky and caused the copper pots to get dirty. So one change in this tradition was using propane tanks underneath to cook the apple butter, and the whole process takes about 6 hours total. And it's a really good like social event because you have different people coming at different times to stir the apple butter around. And then around, let's see, about 12 or 1 is when it's mostly cooked down, and that's when you add the bags of sugar in. And then some people will use red food coloring. Other people use those little hot things. It's like cinnamon hots or something like that, and they dump it in there to like give the taste to the apple butter. The type of apples that we use now are wine sap, because it gives it like a really good like thick taste. And around 2 o'clock is when the apple butter is about fully cooked, and that's when we put it into like the ball jars and seal them up and then have them ready. Originally we did it through the church and we would sell it as like a fundraiser, but then the tradition was like my dad purchased his own copper kettle pot, and we started doing apple butter like personally 2 years ago, and we started making apple butter for like family and friends for holidays, and that's how this tradition has started. And I'm ready for the next question.
One of the greatest traditions I think that was passed down to me from my grandmother, Mary Bell Sally, was the gift of music. And what I mean by that was everything from playing instruments, but mainly vocals. And their family, 12 kids in the family, they all sang harmony. we grew up in that. I didn't know that people didn't sing harmony. I didn't know that people didn't make music. It was part of, for them, entertainment, and we would sit on the porches at night and hear our uncles, aunts, and all of them play. My grandmother would sing these old songs, and they'd all join in and sing harmony. And me and my sister, we didn't know that you couldn't do that. And it was very important to them to pass it down. It was a time for a family to gather around. It was a time for us to also share stories that other people, like traditions and these old folk mountain songs and songs that meant things for our family, and some that were just specific for our family that other people had written, even written about our family. There were other songs that were written that were traditional hymns, or, like I said, folk mountain music. And so it was really interesting to hear that. And then and I think it was important, I know it was important for my grandmother, for all of us to do it. A couple of reasons. She wanted it passed down so it would remain a sense of family, and also to not lose that heritage and that culture that we had back in the mountains. To line out certain songs and everybody would just sing in harmonies, like 4-part harmony. And it was a gathering around, especially in the holidays, and everybody would sing, and it just kept those traditions alive. And it also brings back all those memories, I think because it was also her parents and their parents that passed that down, and that thread of music, that Appalachian music and mountain music, that still, when I write today, writing songs, it still comes out. Those haunting hymns from the mountains. And I think that's something, no matter how far I've traveled, wherever I've gone, she was determined not to let that go away. So even when I write songs, I'd want to go back and to get her approval of them. And even a song I wrote was a mountain style hymn. With the day she died, 2 days, within those 2 days before her funeral, I wrote a song for her, and it was that style that she taught us. And so thankful for that culture. It never ever leaves you, and it calls you back to the mountains, and I thank God for that heritage.
I think tradition in Appalachian culture is important because it's a lifestyle that most of the people that live in Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee were raised on, and it's important to them because it's dying out. There's a lot of stuff that you can't do anymore. Like as far as growing tobacco is a tradition for a lot of families in the early 70s and so on, which nowadays it's basically done. I just think it's really important that people that maintain any kind of tradition that their family has passed down to them, just to have it as a namesake, and it's really important to me.
So why are traditions important to me is it helps you identify like who you are as a person. Like my family, most of them immigrated from England and Germany in the 1800s and started off as being farmers, and like apple butter was like a tradition that started around that time period, and it's cool to see like that aspect of history being passed on, taught from like families generation to generation to generation, because it's not only just a nice skill just to learn how to make apple butter, it's just more of like a social thing. And like today people are more interested in like social media or things on their phone, but when you sit down and you take the time to make apple butter, you're spending a great amount of time with the group you're with, whether it be like friends or family, getting to bond with one another. And not only are you like creating the apple butter, but you're also growing your relationship with others. And that's what's really cool about traditions, is there's like a physical aspect of making something, but then you also have like a psychosocial aspect of social participation, which as humans we're very much social creatures. And like even over here you see like the horses are social creatures too. It's in our nature. So traditions, I believe, should stay around because it helps identify who we are as humans.
I think it's so important when we pass down traditions that we do retain those. It's part of a culture, it's part of our heritage, and so many things get lost. I think when things are so diverse and the world is so big, we learn so many different things. I think it's kind of sad that almost that we're looking at so many things that we feel we should be inclusive about, which I think is great. I've traveled all over the world, seen all, in this country, I've been all 50 states. It's nice to do that, but it's almost, if I did not have the heritage that I have, what would be lost? You lose history, you lose culture, you lose so many aspects of really humanity in some aspects of when I think about our family and heritage. It's so important that we preserve Appalachian culture. And like I've noticed even with students in this area, of course I went to college, learned theater, and learned to speak with no accent, and thought that was a great thing. But then I miss when people don't speak in that Appalachian mountain twang, I'd say, and more kids that are raised up with TV, even that dialect is gone. And so I think it's important that we don't, my grandma used to say, don't get above your raisin. And it's almost, we need those foundations of everything with family. And also there's just such deep cultural roots with family and that are so important that's passed down. And I think it's so important that we hold on to all these traditions and help preserves everything from, again, our heritage. We don't always like what we come from, but it really makes us who we are, and it should be a stepping stone for us to be able to even share with the world who we are. And I would hate to see those traditions go away. So it's very, very important that we retain traditions. Traditions are what make people really who they are. It's identification. You identify with the people's group, and you identify with what we would call home in our hearts. And I think it's important that we can retain that for future. And so it's a part of who we are, and it shouldn't get lost. It's something we should embrace. And I think if we could embrace that with other things, we have something to bring to the table, and it makes us who we are, and it shows this multicultural, wonderful thing that we have going on in the world. And I think it's so important, especially for Appalachia, for us to retain that. We have something great to bring, some wonderful, wonderful history and culture that's to be shared.